I am Eliza, 35 years old, and my family thought they could steal 3 generations of hard-earned wealth right in front of my face. Finally, we will get what we deserve. My brother-in-law, Trent said, rubbing his hands together in the lawyer's office as we waited for my grandmother's will to be read. Eliza never visited anyway, he added, smirking at me from across the mahogany table. The lawyer cleared his throat and pulled down a projector screen. Actually, there is a video message. My grandmother's face appeared on the screen and her voice filled the room. To the vultures who ignored me while I was breathing, she began looking right through the camera. I sat back and smiled, completely unaware that within 60 seconds Trent would pull a piece of paper from his tailored jacket that would threaten to destroy everything my grandmother had built. If you have ever had to protect your family legacy from greedy relatives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe because you will not want to miss how I dismantled their entire empire. The air in Mr. Sterling's office was thick with the scent of expensive leather and cheap entitlement. My grandmother, Josephine, had been in the ground for less than 48 hours, and my younger sister, Eliza, was already scrolling through luxury real estate listings on her phone. Beside her sat Trent, a white man who spoke constantly about his tech startup, but never seemed to actually work. He had married my sister 3 years ago, and from the moment he realized my grandmother owned a multi-million-dollar Southern food distribution network, his eyes had been permanently glued to our family's bank accounts. Sit in the back, Eliza. My mother Vivian had hissed at me when I first walked into the suite. Let Eliza and Trent sit up front. Trent has been so stressed about his startup funding, he needs to hear some good news today. I took the overflow chair in the corner without a single word of protest. My mother had always catered to Eliza's aesthetic. Eliza was the golden child, delicate, constantly pampered and married to a man who promised my mother a country club lifestyle that she desperately craved. I was the dark-skinned, broad-shouldered older sister who wore steel-toed boots and managed the supply chain logistics for the family business. I was the workhorse. Eliza was the show pony. For my entire adult life, my mother treated my relentless work ethic as a character flaw, constantly reminding me that I needed to be softer, more accommodating, and more like my sister if I ever wanted to secure a man to take care of me. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and pressed play on his laptop. The heavy silence in the room broke as Grandma Josephine's face filled the projector screen. She was sitting in her favorite armchair in the historic brownstone she had owned for 40 years, wearing her signature pearl necklace. Even through a pre-recorded video, her presence commanded absolute respect. To my daughter Vivian, Grandma Josephine's voice rang out sharp and unwavering. You spent your entire life chasing a status that does not belong to you. You traded our family's dignity for the illusion of wealth, enabling a son-in-law who looks at our history as nothing more than a bank account. I leave you the sum of $10,000, which is exactly the amount you stole from my purse when you were 22. My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if she had been physically struck. Eliza immediately grabbed Trent's arm, her eyes wide with rising panic. To my granddaughter Eliza, Josephine continued her gaze narrowing. You treated my home like an ATM. You paraded your husband through my dining room, demanding seed money for businesses that do not exist, while refusing to lift a single finger to understand the labor that built this family. I leave you nothing. Eliza dropped her phone. The screen shattered against the hardwood floor, but nobody moved to pick it up. And finally, to Eliza, my grandmother's expression softened, a deep well of pride shining in her eyes. You inherited my spine. You learned the warehouse floor before you even learned how to drive. You protected the supply chain. You managed the drivers. And you respected the labor of the black men and women who built this distribution empire from a single delivery truck in 1968. I leave you the entirety of my $4.5 million estate. The business, the liquid assets, and the historic brownstone are entirely yours. Protect them from the vultures, my brave girl. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, the only sound in the office was the hum of the projector fan. Then the eruption happened. You cannot do this to me, Eliza screamed, launching herself out of her chair. I am your sister. That money is my birthright. Trent promised his investors we would have capital by the end of the month. You have no birthright to a business you have never stepped foot in, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees. On August 14th of last year, you were in Paris putting a $30,000 hotel bill on Grandma's black card. I was on the warehouse floor for 48 hours straight, managing a supply chain crisis during a hurricane, so our drivers would not lose their jobs. You do not want a legacy, Aaliyah. You want a payout. Vivian turned to me, her face flushed with fury. How can you be so selfish, Eliza? Your sister needs security. Trent is on the verge of a major breakthrough with his application. You already have a good salary. You need to do the right thing and share this estate equally. I am not sharing a single dime with a man who thinks my grandmother's life work is his personal venture capital fund, I replied, staring directly at Trent. Trent did not scream. He did not yell. Instead, a slow, chilling smirk spread across his face. He calmly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the center of Mr. Sterling's desk. That video is very cute, Eliza Trent said, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. A real touching family moment. But unfortunately for you, Josephine was not in her right mind toward the end. Her failing health made her very confused about her assets. Last week, she signed the full operational and ownership rights of the distribution business over to my limited liability company for the sum of $1. The room dropped several degrees in temperature. Mr. Sterling picked up the document, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses to read the fine print. It is a standard transfer of corporate ownership, Trent continued, leaning back in his chair and crossing his legs. Josephine realized that the business needed a modern tech-focused mind to bring it into the 21st century. She knew a warehouse manager like you could not handle the expansion, so she signed it over to me. I am the sole owner now. Mr. Sterling, tell me that paper is a joke, I said, my heart slamming against my ribs. Mr. Sterling read through the document twice, the color completely draining from his face. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with profound apology. Eliza, he stammered, the notary seal is legitimate. The witnesses are verified. This signature, it appears to be legally binding. Under state law, a direct transfer of business assets executed prior to death supersedes the directives of a video will regarding those specific corporate assets. Aaliyah let out a breathless laugh of triumph, throwing her arms around Trent's neck. Vivian immediately relaxed her posture, shifting to align with whoever held the power and the money. So, here is how this is going to work, Trent said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. You are going to hand over the keys to the logistics fleet right now. Eliza, you are fired. I will be liquidating the trucks and the warehouse property by next Friday to fund my startup. As for the brownstone, Aaliyah and I will be moving in tomorrow to begin renovations. We are going to flip it. I looked at my mother. You are going to let him liquidate Grandma's entire legacy. You are going to let him sell the business she built from the ground up. Vivian lifted her chin defensively. Trent is a businessman, Eliza. He knows what he is doing. You need to step down gracefully and stop being so combative. It is time to let the men handle the finances. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum like my sister. My brain shifted instantly into the same cold analytical space I used when a major supply chain collapsed. You do not panic when a shipment is hijacked. You trace the routing, you identify the weak points, and you neutralize the threat. Trent had a piece of paper. But a transfer of ownership for a heavily regulated distribution company required more than just a single signature. It required master ledgers, supplier contracts, vendor agreements, and physical property deeds. Without the original files, Trent could not legally sell the warehouse or the trucks. He could not liquidate a single asset, and I knew exactly where Grandma Josephine kept all her original physical files. They were locked inside the massive floor safe in the study of her historic brownstone. I looked at Trent. He was glancing at his watch again, bouncing his leg. He was in a rush. He had the paper, but he knew he needed the physical files to actually access the corporate bank accounts. Keep the paper, Trent, I said quietly. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked straight out of the law office without looking back. I sprinted to my car, my mind racing through the logistics of the city traffic. The brownstone was located in a historically black neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. Trent had been salivating over that property for years, constantly talking about how much money he could make if he gutted the historic interior and sold it to wealthy tech developers. I was not going to let him step foot inside that house. I pushed my car to the limit, weaving through the afternoon traffic, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I needed to get to the house, secure the floor safe, and change the alarm codes before Trent even realized what I was doing. But when I turned onto my grandmother's tree-lined street, My blood ran cold. A massive commercial moving truck was already parked illegally on the front lawn, crushing the rose bushes my grandmother had tended to for 2 decades. Trent's sports car was parked in the driveway. He had not lingered at the lawyer's office to celebrate. He had rushed straight here. I slammed my car into park and sprinted up the concrete steps. Trent and Aaliyah were standing on the front porch. Beside them was a man in a gray uniform holding a heavy-duty industrial drill, actively boring into the brass deadbolt of my grandmother's antique front door. "Step away from that door right now," I ordered my voice, cutting through the neighborhood quiet. The locksmith stopped drilling, looking confused, but Trent stepped in front of the door, completely blocking my path. He had a smug, untouchable smile plastered on his face. "You are too late," Eliza Trent said. "This is my property now. Aaliyah and I are the legal owners of the corporate assets, and we are taking possession of the business files inside. Go back to your apartment before you embarrass yourself. You do not own this house." "Trent," I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "The business transfer does not give you the right to break into residential property. Tell your locksmith to pack up his tools and get off this porch, or I'm calling the police." Trent laughed, a harsh grating sound that made my stomach turn. He looked at Aaliyah, who was rolling her eyes at me. "You are going to call the police?" Trent asked, his tone dripping with mock disbelief. "Let me save you the trouble." Trent pulled his latest model smartphone from his pocket. He did not hesitate. He did not blink. He dialed 911 right in front of me, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear the dispatch operator answer. 911? "What is your emergency?" the operator asked. "Yes. I need officers dispatched immediately," Trent said. His voice completely transformed. The smugness vanished, replaced instantly by the frantic, terrified tone of a victim. "I am at my family property and there is an aggressive, threatening woman trespassing on my porch. She is screaming at me and my wife. We feel incredibly unsafe. Please hurry. I think she might become violent." I stared at him, absolute pure rage radiating through my veins. He was weaponizing his privilege using the exact trigger words designed to bring a hostile police response down on a black woman. He looked me dead in the eye as he gave the dispatcher the address. A cold, calculating monster who knew exactly how the system worked and was fully prepared to use it to destroy my life. I did not back down. I did not raise my voice because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. I stood perfectly still on the top step of the porch, my hands visible, my breathing controlled. Trent wanted me to scream. He wanted me to lash out so that when the cruisers pulled up, he could point his finger and paint me as the volatile threat he just described on the phone. "I am not leaving," I said quietly. Trent ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. His smug smile returned a sickening display of triumph. "They will be here in 3 minutes, Eliza. You should really walk away. You are just a warehouse manager. You do not understand how the real world operates. The people with the right paperwork always win." Aaliyah chimed in, crossing her arms. "Just go home, Eliza. You are ruining everything just like Mom said you would. Trent is trying to secure our future. Why do you always have to be so difficult?" I ignored my sister entirely. My focus remained entirely on the man attempting to break into my grandmother's sanctuary. I could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching. The conflict was no longer just about business assets or family jealousy. Trent was escalating this into a dangerous confrontation, leveraging his identity against mine in a neighborhood my grandmother had helped build. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet, unlocking the screen. I did not have a forged piece of paper. I had irrefutable registered legal proof. As the sirens grew louder, piercing the afternoon air, I prepared myself for the battle ahead. Trent thought he had backed me into a corner. He had no idea that I had spent my entire career anticipating supply chain disruptions, mitigating risks, and outsmarting men exactly like him. He thought he was playing a game of intimidation. I was playing a game of absolute destruction. The wail of the sirens grew deafening. 2 police cruisers swung around the corner, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in frantic flashes. They screeched to a halt right behind Trent's illegally parked sports car. 4 officers stepped out. I watched their hands instinctively dropped to their duty belts. Trent sprang into action, executing his performance with sickening precision. He rushed halfway down the concrete steps, holding his hands up in a placating, non-threatening gesture toward the officers. He positioned himself between them and me, acting as the brave protector of his fragile wife. Aaliyah played her part, flawlessly shrinking behind his shoulder and burying her face in his jacket as if she were terrified I might lunge at her. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Trent called out, his voice shaking with manufactured relief. "She is refusing to leave. We just want her removed peacefully before she hurts someone." Before the lead officer could even respond, a silver Mercedes-Benz swerved aggressively against the opposite curb. The driver's side door flew open, and my mother Vivian scrambled out. She must have followed Trent from the law office, terrified of missing whatever high society aesthetic he was about to secure. Vivian took one look at the flashing lights, the police and me standing on the porch, and immediately calculated the optics. She did not run to me. She ran straight to the officers. "Please, officers," Vivian cried out, pressing a hand to her chest. Crocodile tears instantly pulled in her eyes. "I am her mother. This is a family dispute." She has always been incredibly jealous of her younger sister. She is unstable and prone to outbursts. We are just trying to secure our family business, and she is having some kind of episode. Please do not arrest her. Just remove her from the property. I stood my ground on the top step. My heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and deep. I knew the lethal reality of this situation. A black woman painted as aggressive and unstable by a well-dressed white man and a weeping older woman was a target. I could not raise my voice. I could not make sudden movements. I had to be colder and more calculating than all of them combined. The lead officer walked up the walkway. His expression hardened into a mask of authority. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at me. "Ma'am, I need you to step down from the porch right now," he ordered. "Keep your hands where I can see them." I complied immediately. I walked down the steps slowly, deliberately, keeping my hands completely visible. In my left hand, I held my tablet. In my right hand, I held my driver's license. "I am cooperating, officer," I said, my tone perfectly, even devoid of any anger or panic. "I am not a threat to anyone. I am standing on my own property, and these people are attempting to break into my home." Trent let out a scoff of pure disbelief. "Do not listen to her," he told the officer. "My wife and I just inherited this estate today. We have the legal corporate transfer documents right here. She is a disgruntled former employee trying to squat on our property." The officer turned back to me, holding out his hand. "Let me see your identification, Mom." I handed him my license. He looked at the plastic card, his eyes scanning the text. "The address on this license matches this property." The officer noted his tone, shifting slightly from hostile to investigative. He looked at Trent. "She is a registered resident here. She just lived here with her grandmother." Vivian interjected quickly, stepping closer to the officer. "The grandmother passed away 2 days ago. The estate is now under the control of my son-in-law. She has no legal right to the premises anymore. She is just throwing a tantrum." I did not even look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked on the officer. "Officer," I said smoothly, raising my tablet, "my grandmother did not leave this house to the estate. 2 years ago, she and I went to the city registry. She executed a joint tenancy deed with right of survivorship. When she passed away, full ownership of this physical property transferred immediately and automatically to me. It completely bypassed probate. It is not part of any corporate asset transfer." I tapped the screen of my tablet and handed it to him. Displayed in bright, undeniable, high definition was the official property tax portal for the city. It showed the legally recorded deed. The current sole owner of the historic brownstone was listed clearly, Eliza Josephine Vance. Trent's smug smile instantly vanished. He snatched the corporate transfer document from his jacket and shoved it toward the officer. "That is impossible." Trent snapped his voice, losing its polished veneer. "I have the signed transfer of the distribution business right here. She signed everything over to my company." The officer looked at Trent's paper, then back at my tablet. The officer was not a corporate lawyer, but he knew how to read a city property deed. "Sir," the officer said, taking a step back from Trent, "this document you are holding is a transfer of a business entity. It does not list physical real estate. This woman's name is on the city deed for this residential address. She is the legal owner of this house." Aaliyah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Vivian stumbled back as if all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Trent stood perfectly still, his face turning a mottled shade of red. His grand, manipulative performance was collapsing under the weight of cold, hard logistics. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent yard, I did not authorize any locksmith to drill into my front door. This man, I pointed directly at Trent, is actively trespassing on my private property and attempting a breaking and entering. The atmosphere among the police officers shifted entirely. The hands that had been resting on their belts moved away. The lead officer turned his full imposing attention on to Trent. "Sir, is that your locksmith?" the officer demanded. Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the locksmith, who was already hastily packing his heavy-duty drill into his tool bag, wanting no part of a trespassing charge. "I was just," Trent stammered, running a hand through his hair. "I was under the impression the real estate was included in the corporate assets. It was a misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," I said. "It is an attempted burglary. Officer, I want him off my property right now, and I want the keys the locksmith just cut." The officer held out his hand toward Trent. "Hand over the keys, sir. Right now." Trent's jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might shatter. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the newly cut brass keys, and practically threw them into the officer's waiting hand. The officer passed the keys directly to me. "You need to vacate these premises immediately," the officer told Trent, his voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Move the truck, move your car, and do not return unless you have a court order. If you step foot on this property again, you will be arrested for trespassing." Aaliyah started to cry real tears. This time, her face flushing with total embarrassment as the neighbors began stepping out onto their porches to watch the spectacle. Vivian tried to reach out to me, her hands trembling. "Eliza, please." Vivian pleaded, her voice cracking. "Do not do this. We are family. Let us just go inside and talk about this reasonably." "You told the police I was an unstable, jealous threat 10 minutes ago," I said, looking right through my mother. "Get off my lawn." Trent grabbed Aaliyah by the arm and dragged her toward his sports car. He did not look back. He shoved her into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and peeled out of the driveway, the tires squealing against the asphalt. Vivian hurried back to her Mercedes, refusing to make eye contact with the neighbors, and sped off right behind them. The locksmith threw his bag into his van and drove away without asking for payment. The police lingered just long enough to ensure the property was clear before nodding to me and returning to their cruisers. I stood alone on the front walkway. The flashing lights faded away down the street, leaving the neighborhood in complete silence. I had won. I had beaten Trent at his own game. I had used the system he tried to weaponize against me and turned it into his absolute humiliation. I gripped the new brass keys in my hand, feeling a profound surge of victory. I walked up the concrete step, swept the metal shavings off the welcome mat with my boot, and unlocked the heavy front door. I stepped inside the grand foyer. The air was still and quiet, filled with the familiar scent of my grandmother's lavender polish and old books. I locked the deadbolt behind me, taking a deep breath. I needed to get straight to the study, open the floor safe, and secure the original vendor contracts. With those physical documents in my possession, Trent's corporate transfer paper would be completely useless. I would freeze the business accounts before he could even call a bank. But as I walked down the long shadowed hallway toward the back of the house, my victory vanished. My footsteps slowed. My heart skipped a beat. The scent of lavender was suddenly overpowered by something sharp and acrid. It smelled like scorched dust and burning metal. I broke into a run, rounding the corner and shoving open the heavy oak doors to Grandma Josephine's study. The breath was completely knocked out of my lungs. The beautiful, meticulously kept study was utterly ransacked. The antique mahogany desk had been swept clear, papers and pens scattered across the room. The heavy Persian rug that normally sat in the center of the floor had been shoved violently into the corner. The original hardwood floorboards had been splintered and pried up with a crowbar. Exposed beneath the ruined wood was the heavy steel casing of my grandmother's hidden floor safe, but the safe was not locked. The thick steel door had been brutally bored through with a high-powered thermal drill. The locking mechanism was melted into a puddle of slag. The heavy door hung wide open on its hinges, exposing the dark interior. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the sharp splinters of wood digging through my pants. I reached my hands into the dark cavity of the safe. My fingers scraped against the cold steel bottom. It was completely empty. Every single master ledger, every original supplier contract, every vendor agreement, and every piece of physical leverage my grandmother had hoarded for decades was gone. Trent had not been trying to break into the house. He had been trying to change the locks so I could not get in. He had already been inside. He had already taken everything. I brushed my fingers against the scorched steel of the safe. The metal was still warm to the touch, leaving a smear of dark soot across my skin. My heart hammered in my chest as my logistics training automatically kicked in, forcing my brain to analyze the scene systematically instead of succumbing to panic. I looked closer at the melted locking mechanism. Then I looked at the heavy steel bolts recessed perfectly into the doorframe. My breath caught in my throat. This was a custom-built TL-30 rated floor safe. I knew its exact specifications because I was the one who had coordinated its installation for my grandmother 5 years ago. If a thief attempts to bore through the lock face of this specific model with a thermal drill, a hidden tempered glass plate shatters inside the door. That shattering triggers a secondary spring-loaded relocking mechanism, firing solid steel bolts permanently into the frame. The safe effectively becomes a solid block of impenetrable metal. You cannot pry it open once that glass breaks. But the bolts on this door were smoothly retracted. The glass plate was completely intact. The thermal drill damage was nothing but a theatrical production. It was a staged break-in. Trent wanted the police and the insurance companies to think the safe had been forcefully cracked. But the only way those bolts retracted so perfectly was if the digital master code had been entered into the keypad first. Trent opened the safe, legally took everything inside, and then destroyed the lock to cover his tracks. But Trent was not smart enough to bypass a biometric and digital security system on his own. He did not know the master code. Grandma Josephine never wrote that combination down on a piece of paper. She kept it entirely in her head. She only ever entrusted that code to one other living person strictly to be used in the event of a severe medical emergency where she might be incapacitated. She gave it to her only daughter, my mother. I dropped the heavy steel door. It slammed against the floorboards with a deafening crack. I bolted out of the study. I sprinted down the long hallway, my boots slipping wildly on the polished hardwood floors. I tore open the front door and bounded down the concrete steps, ignoring the burning ache in my lungs. Vivian had not left the neighborhood yet. Her silver Mercedes-Benz was idling at the end of the block, waiting for a break in the cross-traffic to turn onto the main avenue. I sprinted down the middle of the street. I did not care what the neighbors thought. I did not care how unhinged I looked. I planted my body directly in the center of the intersection, cutting off her exit path. Vivian slammed on her brakes. The heavy luxury car screeched to a halt just 2 feet away from my knees. I marched straight around to the driver's side window and slammed my open palm against the tinted glass. "Roll it down," I ordered, my voice muffled but commanding through the heavy glass. Vivian stared at me through the window, her eyes wide with shock. She shook her head, gripping her leather steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She reached for the gear shift to put the car in reverse. I slammed my hand against the glass again, harder this time. "Roll the window down right now, or I swear I will stand in front of this car until the police come back." Vivian glared at me, her jaw tightened with deep resentment. Slowly, the tinted window glided down. The cold air rushed into the pristine, leather-scented interior of her car. "Have you completely lost your mind, Eliza?" Vivian hissed. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking. "You are making a spectacle of yourself. Get out of the street before someone calls the authorities on you." "You gave him the code," I said. My voice was eerily calm, contrasting violently with the chaos around us. Vivian blinked. Her eyes darted away from mine, fixing on the dashboard. "I do not know what you are talking about. Move out of the way. Do not lie to me," I snapped, stepping closer until my shadow fell over her face. "That floor safe has a glass relocker. Trent could not drill it open without triggering the failsafe. He entered the master code first, emptied the contents, and then melted the keypad to make it look like a burglary. Only 2 people in the world had that code. Grandma is dead. That leaves you." Vivian swallowed hard. Her throat bobbed. She refused to look me in the eye. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. A wave of profound, suffocating betrayal washed over me. "You sold out your own mother," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Grandma has not even been in the ground for 2 days. She built that business with her bare hands. She bled for it, and you handed the keys to her entire kingdom to a white man who has never worked a hard day in his miserable life." Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes flashed with defensive fury. She finally met my gaze, and I saw the absolute desperation radiating from her. "He is expanding his tech startup, Eliza," she yelled, her voice cracking with emotion. He is on the verge of securing a massive round of funding. He just needed collateral. He needed the assets on paper to show his investors that he has real backing. He manipulated you. I shot back. He used your obsession with status to rob your own family blind. He is going to liquidate everything. He told me to my face, he is selling the fleet and flipping the brownstone. He is doing what needs to be done to secure your sister's future. Vivian shouted right back at me, gripping the steering wheel. Aaliyah needs a certain lifestyle. She cannot live like a common laborer. She belongs in those country club circles. Trent is giving her the life I always wanted for her. The life you refuse to understand. I stared at her, completely disgusted. You let him steal millions of dollars of black generational wealth so your youngest daughter can keep buying designer handbags and attending charity galas. You already have a good job. Vivian spat, tears of pure frustration pooling in her eyes. You have a high salary. You manage supply chains. You can take care of yourself. Why do you have to be so greedy with your grandmother's things? Why can you not just step aside and let your sister have this? You have always been so selfish, Eliza, so hard and unforgiving. If you had just been softer, maybe you would have a husband like Trent to provide for you. The words hit me like a physical blow. It was the core wound of our entire relationship laid bare in the middle of the street. My mother valued the aesthetic of wealth and the proximity to whiteness that Trent provided far more than she valued the blood, sweat, and loyalty of her own daughter. She viewed my independence not as a strength, but as a reason why I deserve nothing. Because I could survive the storm, she decided it was perfectly acceptable to leave me out in the rain. I felt a fundamental shift inside my chest. The last lingering thread of daughterly obligation I held onto snapped. You are a fool, I said quietly. My voice was devoid of any anger now. It was just empty. Trent does not care about Aaliyah. He does not care about you. He is using you to bleed this family dry. And when the money is gone, he will drop both of you without a second thought. Vivian sneered, swiping a tear from her cheek. Trent is a businessman. He knows how the world works. You are just a warehouse manager who thinks she owns the world. Step away from my car, Eliza. I am done talking to you. I took one step back. Vivian rolled up the window, cutting off my view of her face. She hit the gas and the Mercedes sped down the street, disappearing around the corner. I stood alone in the middle of the road. The cold wind bit through my sweater, but I barely felt it. My mind was rapidly sorting through the data points Vivian had just handed me. Trent needed collateral. He needed the physical assets on paper to show his investors. I turned and looked back at the historic brownstone standing tall against the afternoon sky. I thought about the empty safe in the study. My grandmother did not just keep supplier contracts and business deeds in that safe. Josephine was a brilliant old-school businesswoman who survived decades in an industry dominated by men who wanted to see her fail. She survived by keeping receipts. She survived by maintaining meticulous, undeniable leverage over every single supplier, vendor, and corporate partner she did business with. The safe did not hold cash. It held power. It held the private shadow ledgers, the hidden financials, the real contracts, the leverage that kept the entire distribution empire functioning, and now a desperate, greedy man with a failing tech startup had total physical possession of 3 generations of leverage. I walked slowly back toward my car, pulling my phone from my pocket. Trent thought he had won because he possessed the paperwork and the private files. He thought he had outsmarted me by manipulating my mother. But he had made one massive, fatal miscalculation. He assumed I was just a warehouse manager who moved boxes from point A to point B. He did not realize that I oversaw the entire financial logistics network. I knew the routing numbers. I knew the supplier schedules. I knew the exact pressure points of the entire corporate structure. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car and started the engine. I was not going to play defense anymore. Trent wanted to steal a distribution empire. I was going to show him exactly what happens when the supply chain fights back. I drove straight from my grandmother's ransacked brownstone to the headquarters of my own independent logistics firm. I did not sleep for a single second. I spent the entire night locked inside my office, drinking cold coffee and mapping out every single pressure point in our distribution network. Through the glass floor of my mezzanine office, I could watch the night shift working in the warehouse below. I listened to the steady, comforting hum of the forklifts and the echoing shouts of the dock workers loading the early morning delivery trucks. If Trent thought he could walk into a supply chain and just take over because he had a piece of paper, he was a fool. I knew the delivery routes. I knew the specific vendor contracts. I was preparing to reroute our most profitable shipments to independent holding companies before he could even log into my grandmother's main server. At 7 inches the morning, I tried to authorize a standard weekly fuel payment for my fleet of independent drivers. I typed my corporate credit card number into the portal and hit submit. The screen blinked, then flashed a glaring red error message. Transaction declined. I frowned, assuming it was a simple fraud alert caused by the unusually high volume of morning traffic. I pulled out my secondary corporate purchasing card and ran it through the terminal. Declined. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I opened my banking application to check the master balances. Every single account associated with my independent logistics company showed an available balance of 0. Right across the top of my screen was a bold red banner that read, "Account frozen by court order." I picked up my phone and dialed my private banker immediately. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with an anxiety that sent a chill down my spine. "Eliza," he said, sounding genuinely terrified, "I am so sorry. I was just about to call you. Our legal department received an emergency court injunction at 6 this morning. Your operating accounts, your payroll accounts, and your corporate credit lines have all been completely frozen by a judicial mandate." I stood up my heavy desk chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Frozen?" I demanded. "On what grounds I own this logistics company outright? What does my independent business have to do with my grandmother's estate dispute?" The banker took a deep, unsteady breath. "Your mother, Vivian, filed an emergency medical injunction late last night. She submitted a sworn affidavit from a private physician claiming that your grandmother, Josephine, suffered from severe undocumented dementia for the last 3 years of her life. The injunction claims that every financial decision Josephine made during that time period is legally invalid due to mental incompetence and is subject to immediate asset seizure for a federal investigation. I felt the blood drain entirely from my face. My grandmother was sharp as a tack until the very day. Her heart simply stopped beating. She never had dementia. She was actively negotiating complex international import rates just last month. This was a complete malicious fabrication, but I still did not understand how her estate battles affected my daily operations. "My logistics company is a completely separate legal entity," I told the banker, gripping the edge of my desk. "Josephine did not run my board. She was just a silent seed investor when I started the firm 5 years ago." "That is exactly the problem, Eliza," the banker explained gently. "Because Josephine provided your initial seed capital during the exact 3-year window, the doctor claims she was mentally incapacitated. The court has frozen your business as a contested asset of her broader estate. Trent's legal team filed the corporate paperwork alongside your mother's medical affidavit. They successfully argued to a judge that your entire company was built on misappropriated funds from a dementia patient. Until the court appoints an independent investigator to review the finances, you cannot move a single dollar." I ended the call and stared at the dark screen of my computer. The sheer terrifying brilliance of Trent's plan finally clicked into place. He did not just want my grandmother's distribution business. He wanted to completely neutralize me. He knew I was the only person with the operational knowledge, the legal standing, and the sheer willpower to stop him from liquidating my family's legacy. So, he used my own mother to cut off my life support. He had paid off a shady, unethical doctor to write a fake medical report, and my mother had willingly signed her name to it. Vivian was so desperate to secure Aaliyah's wealthy aesthetic that she was willing to declare her own mother mentally incompetent and financially destroy her oldest daughter in the exact same breath. The reality of the situation crashed down on me like a physical weight. I had payroll due in exactly 48 hours. I employed 75 people. Most of them were hard-working Black men and women from my community who relied on my logistics firm to feed their families, pay their mortgages, and keep a roof over their heads. My drivers needed fuel money today to keep the supply chain moving. My warehouse staff needed their weekly wages on Friday. If I missed payroll, the state would automatically suspend my operating licenses. My entire business, everything I had built with my own 2 hands and sacrificed my personal life for over the past 5 years, would completely collapse before the weekend even started. The courts would take months to unravel a fraudulent medical injunction. Trent knew the legal system moved at a glacial pace. He knew I did not have months to fight him in front of a judge. I barely had 2 days. I paced my office, my mind racing frantically through every possible contingency. I called Mr. Sterling, hoping there was some obscure legal loophole I could exploit. but the elderly attorney sounded completely defeated on the other end of the line. Eliza, an emergency medical freeze is a judicial stranglehold. Mr. Sterling told me, his voice heavy with sincere regret. Trent used a highly aggressive corporate litigation firm to push this through a sympathetic judge in the middle of the night. We can fight the dementia claim. We can demand our own independent medical review, but it requires filing motions, scheduling hearings, and presenting evidence. It will take weeks just to get a preliminary court date. You need liquid capital to survive until then, and right now your hands are legally tied. I hung up the phone, feeling the walls of my office closing in around me. I looked down through the glass floor at my employees. I saw Marcus, my lead driver, who just had his first baby girl last month. I saw Sarah, my brilliant dispatcher, who was working overtime to pay off her student loans. Trent was playing venture capital games with real people's livelihoods. He moved through the world, destroying things without consequence, assuming the system would always protect him. I looked at the framed photograph of Grandma Josephine sitting on my desk. Her stern, proud face seemed to be challenging me. "Protect them from the vultures, my brave girl." Those were her final words to me. But how could I protect her legacy when I could not even protect my own employees? How could I fight a war when my own mother had stolen my weapons and handed them directly to the enemy? A sudden commotion outside my office pulled me sharply from my dark thoughts. I heard the frantic, elevated voice of my receptionist demanding that someone stop immediately. "You cannot go in there without an appointment," she warned, her chair scraping loudly against the floor as she physically tried to block the corridor. The heavy glass door to my private office swung open so violently it bounced hard against the wall stopper. Trent walked in looking like a man who had just conquered the world. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his hair impeccably styled looking, every bit the wealthy, untouchable tech founder he pretended to be. He did not look like a man who had just broken into a safe and forged a medical document to destroy a family. He looked like an absolute winner. He strolled right past my terrified receptionist, waving her away with a flick of his wrist without even bothering to look at her face. He stopped directly in front of my desk, a smug, victorious grin stretching across his features. He reached into his expensive leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and dropped them onto my desk with a heavy thud. It was a corporate buyout contract. The thick stack of paper hit my desk with a heavy, definitive thud. Trent did not sit down. He leaned over my desk, placing both of his perfectly manicured hands flat on the glass surface, invading my space. He wanted me to feel the physical weight of his presence. He wanted me to feel trapped. "Take a good look at page 4, Eliza," Trent said, his voice dripping with a sickly sweet corporate professionalism. "I am offering you a lifeline. It is a full acquisition contract. My company will absorb your independent logistics firm. I will take over the warehouse lease, the commercial trucking fleet, and all active vendor routing contracts. In exchange, I am purchasing the entity for the sum of $1. I stared at the thick stack of paper, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of what he was proposing. "You are trying to buy a company that generates millions in annual revenue for a single dollar," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I am not trying to buy anything." Trent corrected a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. "I am rescuing a failing business. Once you sign your name on the dotted line and transfer your ownership to my limited liability company, I will make a quick phone call to Vivian. Your mother will immediately contact her lawyers and have the emergency medical injunction lifted. Your operating accounts will be unfrozen by tomorrow morning. Your drivers get their fuel money. Your warehouse staff gets their paychecks on Friday. No one loses their house. Everyone wins." I looked up from the contract, meeting his eyes. My chest was tight, but I refused to let him see me panic. "You are holding my payroll hostage to steal my company. This is textbook extortion, Trent. It is illegal, and you will go to federal prison for it." Trent threw his head back and laughed. It was a genuine, relaxed laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my office. "Extortion is such an ugly word, Eliza. I prefer to call it aggressive market consolidation. And as for federal prison, you are forgetting one tiny detail. I am not the one who froze your accounts. Your own mother did that. Vivian swore under penalty of perjury that your grandmother was suffering from severe dementia. Vivian asked the court to freeze the assets. I am just a concerned family member trying to help you avoid a catastrophic bankruptcy." He walked around the side of my desk, stepping far too close to my chair. He dropped the professional facade completely. The charming tech founder vanished, and the arrogant, entitled predator underneath finally showed his true face. You think you are so smart, he whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. You walk around in your steel-toed boots, barking orders at truck drivers, playing the independent, self-made woman. You thought you could just outwork everyone. You thought because you put in the grueling hours, you actually owned the board. But you do not own the board, Eliza. People like me own the board. I did not flinch. I did not lean away from him. I stared straight into his pale, hollow eyes. You do not own anything. You are a parasite feeding off my grandmother's legacy, because your own startup is a complete failure. Trent's jaw tightened, a flash of genuine anger breaking through his smug expression. My startup is about to secure its Series A funding, he spat back. And the capital from liquidating this pathetic, outdated distribution network is going to get me there. Your mother practically handed me the keys. Do you know why Vivan gave me the safe code? Because I promised to put her and Aaliyah on the VIP guest list for my launch gala this weekend. She sold out your entire life's work just for the chance to wear a designer gown and stand next to wealthy investors. She wants to belong to my world, Eliza. You are the only one standing in the way. He stood up straight, adjusting his expensive tie, his composure returning. The system was built to protect men like me, he said, his voice returning to that infuriatingly calm cadence. It was not built to protect women like you. You can fight me if you want. You can hire lawyers and spend the next 6 months arguing in a courtroom while your business completely bleeds out. But by the time a judge finally looks at your case, your commercial licenses will be revoked. Your employees will be evicted from their homes. Your reputation in this city will be absolute garbage. Or you can sign the paper, walk away with nothing, and ensure your people get paid on Friday. Trent tapped his finger twice against the buyout contract. You have 24 hours to make a decision, he said. The banks close at 5 tomorrow afternoon. If I do not have your signature by then, I let your company drown. I will see you tomorrow, Eliza. Trent turned around and walked out of my office, leaving the heavy glass door wide open behind him. My receptionist peeked her head around the corner, her eyes wide with terror, having heard enough of the conversation to know that her job was in jeopardy. I gave her a reassuring nod, telling her to go home early and get some rest. I needed to be alone. The hours bled away. The afternoon sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long, dark shadows across my office. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat in the darkness, staring through the glass floor at the warehouse below. The night shift had arrived. I watched Jamal, a young man who had just bought his first house, expertly maneuvering a forklift down the center aisle. I saw Sarah, my brilliant logistics coordinator, laughing with a delivery driver as she handed him his routing clipboard. This was my empire. I had built the operational side of this company from absolutely nothing. I knew the names of every single person working on that floor. I knew their families. I knew their struggles. They trusted me to steer the ship, and right now, the ship was sinking. A heavy, suffocating despair settled over my chest. Trent was right about one thing. I could not let my people suffer just to protect my own pride. If I fought the injunction in court, I would lose the company anyway due to missed payroll. If I signed Trent's contract, I would lose the company, but Jamal could pay his mortgage. Sarah could pay her student loans. The agonizing weight of defeat threatened to crush me. I reached across my desk and picked up a heavy silver pen. I pulled the buyout contract toward me. I opened it to the final page, staring at the blank signature line. Giving up my independence, handing my grandmother's legacy over to a fraudulent, entitled thief, felt like cutting out my own heart. I positioned the tip of the pen over the paper. A sharp knock on the glass door shattered the silence. I looked up. Standing in the doorway was Maxine. Maxine was my warehouse manager. She was a fiercely loyal, non-nonsense black woman in her late 50s who had worked for my grandmother for 2 decades before coming to work for my independent firm. She wore a bright yellow, high-visibility vest over her sweater, holding a thick clipboard against her chest. She took one look at me, sitting in the dark with a pen in my hand, and she immediately knew something was critically wrong. Maxine stepped into the office. She closed the heavy glass door behind her and locked the deadbolt. Without asking for permission, she walked over to the windows and twisted the rod, snapping the horizontal blinds completely shut so no one on the warehouse floor could see inside. She marched up to my desk and looked down at the buyout contract. She reached out and snatched the silver pen right out of my hand. "What do you think you are doing, baby girl?" Maxine asked, her voice low and demanding. I rubbed my tired eyes, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. I'm saving the payroll, Maxine. Vivian froze the accounts. Trent wants the company. If I do not sign this over to him by tomorrow at 5, the state suspends our licenses, and none of you get paid on Friday. I have no other choice. I cannot let you all go hungry just to fight a battle I cannot win. Maxine let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. She threw my silver pen across the room. It clattered loudly against the baseboards. You think your grandmother raised a woman who surrenders? Maxine asked, placing her hands on her hips. You think Josephine did not see this exact nonsense coming from a mile away? I frowned, completely confused. What are you talking about? Trent drilled the safe in the brownstone magazine. He took everything, all the physical leverage, all the vendor contracts, all the master ledgers. I have absolutely nothing left to fight him with. Maxine smiled. It was a slow, knowing smile that carried decades of inherited wisdom. She reached deep into the front pocket of her heavy work trousers. She pulled out a small rectangular object wrapped in a velvet pouch. She placed it carefully onto the glass surface of my desk. I reached out and pulled away the velvet. It was a heavy Militera solid-state hard drive. It was encased in titanium, lacking any standard branding or serial numbers. It was heavy, dense, and completely encrypted. I stared at the drive, then looked up at my warehouse manager. Maxine, what is this? Josephine gave this to me 3 months ago, Maxine said quietly, her eyes locking onto mine with an intense burning clarity. She knew her health was actually slipping, but she knew Vivian was too blinded by status to ever be trusted with the truth. She knew that White Boy was hovering around her assets like a vulture. She handed me this drive in the middle of a shift. She told me to hide it where nobody but me could find it. Maxine tapped her index finger firmly against the top of the titanium drive. The screen of my computer illuminated the dark office with a harsh blue light. I did not blink as rows of encrypted data decoded themselves right in front of my eyes. Grandma Josephine had not just left me a letter or a vague warning. She had left me a fully audited, comprehensive map of a financial massacre. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the spreadsheets as my logistics training took over immediately. Trent thought he was a tech genius, but he was incredibly sloppy. He did not understand how a physical supply chain actually operated, so his fake expenses stuck out to me like a flashing red siren. He had set up dummy vendor accounts embedded deep within our distribution network. He buelled the company for refrigerated freight trucks that did not exist. He charged exorbitant supply line consulting fees to phantom limited liability companies registered to empty lots in Delaware. I tracked the routing numbers, matching them against the dates Trent claimed his startup was receiving independent angel investments. He had been systematically embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars of our black generational wealth to fund his failing application. He was bleeding my grandmother dry while sitting at her dining room table eating the food she paid for. I reached for my phone, ready to dial Mr. Sterling and the police. I had the smoking gun right in my hands. With this hard drive, I could walk into a precinct and have Trent arrested for felony embezzlement by midnight. The court would void the business transfer. The medical injunction would be thrown out, and my payroll accounts would be unfrozen. I had won. But as I pulled up the digitized transfer slips to print the physical evidence, my hand froze over the mouse. I zoomed in on the authorization signatures at the bottom of the fraudulent invoices. My blood ran completely cold, chilling me down to the marrow of my bones. It was not Trent's signature authorizing the transfer of funds from my grandmother's corporate accounts into the dummy shell companies. The ink belonged to someone else entirely. It was Vivian's signature. I slumped back in my heavy leather chair, the air knocked out of my lungs. Trent had not just stolen from us. He had insulated himself by using my mother as his financial mule. Vivian had maintained power of attorney over certain secondary estate accounts for years. She was so desperate for proximity to Trent's perceived upper-class status, so eager to please the white son-in-law who promised her a country club aesthetic, that she had signed whatever documents he placed in front of her. She authorized business expenses she did not bother to understand. She rubber-stamped his theft because he smiled and told her she was helping build a modern empire. Trent manipulated my status-obsessed mother into becoming an unwitting accomplice to massive corporate fraud. He knew exactly what he was doing. If I handed this drive directly to the authorities right now, the paper trail pointed straight to Vivian. Trent would simply hide behind his corporate veil. He would claim he was just an external consultant and that my mother orchestrated the embezzlement to fund her own lifestyle. Vivian would go to federal prison. I stared at the glowing screen, trapped in a suffocating web of legal and moral logistics. I deeply resented my mother. She had sold me out. She had helped freeze my business, and she had stood by while a predator tried to steal my grandmother's entire legacy. Her obsession with looking wealthy had almost cost us everything, but I would not let a greedy, entitled man use a black woman as a human shield for a federal crime. I would not let my mother take the fall for his theft. It went against everything my grandmother stood for. Josephine built this empire to protect our family, not to see us locked in a cage for the benefit of a thief. But the clock was ticking violently against me. I had payroll due in less than 48 hours. Standard police procedures and forensic accounting would take weeks, maybe months, to untangle Vivian from Trent web of shell companies. I did not have weeks. I did not have days. I needed my operating accounts unfrozen by tomorrow afternoon, or my employees would lose their homes. I could not wait for the justice system to slowly analyze spreadsheets. I needed an immediate lethal strike. The only way to instantly clear my mother's name and simultaneously obliterate Trent was to secure a direct, undeniable confession from him. I needed him on tape explicitly detailing how he orchestrated the fraud, how he forged the documents, and how he manipulated Vivian into signing the transfers. Once I had his voice admitting to the manipulation, the authorities would have the context they needed to target him instead of her. But Trent was not a fool in that regard. He was currently barricaded behind a wall of aggressive corporate lawyers. I picked up my phone and called his office line. It went straight to a legal receptionist who informed me in a clipped tone that Trent was unavailable and all communication must go through his appointed counsel. I could not corner him in a boardroom. He had insulated himself perfectly, retreating to his safe spaces where my voice could not reach him. I needed to flush him out. I needed to catch him in an environment where his ego outweighed his caution. Arrogant men always have a blind spot, and Trent's blind spot was his desperate consuming need for public validation. He craved an audience. I opened a new tab on my browser and pulled up his public social media profiles. I scrolled past the staged photos of him and Eliza playing the perfect power couple. I ignored the posts boasting about innovation and market disruption. Then my eyes locked onto a post from his business page. There it was, a massive high-defin promotional flyer posted just 3 hours ago tonight. He was hosting a highly exclusive invite-only gala at a luxury downtown venue to officially launch his tech startup. He had rented out the entire top floor of the grand ballroom in the financial district. He was pouring expensive champagne for the city's top venture capitalists, politicians, and social elites. He was preparing to parade around as a visionary founder entirely funded by the stolen labor of my grandmother and the impending bankruptcy of my logistics firm. He thought he had completely won. He thought he had buried me, silenced my mother, and secured his fortune all in one brilliant stroke. He believed he was untouchable tonight, surrounded by wealth and power, celebrating a victory built on my family's back. I closed my laptop and stood up in the dark office. My logistics training shifted from corporate survival to absolute warfare. I could not just fight him in a sterile courtroom months from now. I had to destroy him on his own stage. I had to become the ultimate supply chain disruption, walking right into the center of his perfect aesthetic and tearing it down to the studs. I grabbed my keys, ready to deliver a package he would never see coming. The financial district downtown is a fortress of glass and steel built to keep people like me out. It is a neighborhood constructed on the illusion of absolute exclusivity, where venture capitalists and tech founders hide behind private security details and velvet ropes. But people like Trent always forget one fundamental truth about their highly exclusive events. Wealthy people do not cook their own food. They do not pour their own expensive drinks. They do not haul their own garbage out of the building. They rely entirely on an invisible, poorly paid army of service workers and complex supply chains to maintain their luxurious aesthetic. And the supply chain is my territory. I pulled my car into a dark, narrow alleyway 1 block away from the towering skyscraper where Trent was hosting his launch gala. He had rented the penthouse ballroom for the evening. It was a venue that cost more for a single night than most of my warehouse workers made in an entire year. He was throwing a massive congratulatory party with stolen money. He was pouring expensive champagne for investors and local politicians, celebrating a tech company built entirely on the back of my grandmother's hard work and the impending bankruptcy of my own logistics firm. I grabbed a heavy white canvas bag from my passenger seat and stepped out into the freezing night air. I needed to get inside that ballroom tonight. I needed to stand right in front of him and force a direct confession from his own lips to clear my mother's name. But I knew Trent was a coward who planned for the obvious threats. He had hired a high-end private security firm to man the front doors. I guarantee he handed those guards a printed photograph of my face with strict orders to call the police. The second I stepped onto the red carpet, he wanted to ensure I could not cause a scene and embarrass him in front of his wealthy donors. But Trent did not understand logistics. He only understood the front door. He completely ignored the loading dock. I walked briskly down the alleyway toward the rear service entrance of the skyscraper. The catering company servicing tonight's gala was Premier Events. I knew exactly who they were because my logistics firm supplied 60% of their wholesale produce and dry goods. The owner, Marcus, was a black man who started his catering business out of his own tiny kitchen. I had helped him optimize his delivery routes 3 years ago when a massive national supplier tried to aggressively run him out of the local market. Marcus owed me a significant favor. When I called him an hour ago asking for backdoor access to the penthouse, he did not ask a single question. He just told me what time the freight elevator made its final run. I approached the massive steel roll-up doors of the loading dock. 2 private security guards in sharp black suits stood by the freight elevators. They were checking the identification badges of the catering staff who were frantically loading silver warming trays onto heavy metal utility carts. I slipped behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets and opened my canvas bag. I was not wearing my usual steel-toed boots and denim work jacket. Underneath my heavy winter coat, I wore a floor-length emerald green evening gown. It was tailored perfectly to my shoulders, dripping with quiet, undeniable power. I stepped out of my heavy boots and slid my feet into a pair of black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, elegant twist. Then I pulled a baggy, stained, oversized white chef's coat out of the canvas bag. I slipped the chef's coat on, zipping it all the way up to my neck, completely concealing the emerald gown beneath it. The coat smelled faintly of roasted garlic and bleach. I grabbed an empty silver catering tray from a nearby stack, holding it tightly against my hip to complete the disguise. I stepped out from behind the wooden pallets and walked straight toward the freight elevators, blending seamlessly into the chaotic flow of the rushing kitchen staff. The security guards at the service entrance barely even looked at me. To them, a black woman wearing a baggy chef's coat and carrying a metal tray was completely invisible. I was just part of the machinery. I was the help. I walked right past the guards, keeping my head down and my pace steady. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my hands did not shake. I stepped into the massive freight elevator just as the heavy metal doors began to slide shut. A young line cook standing next to me gave me a tired nod. We rode up 40 floors in complete silence, surrounded by the smell of searing meat and expensive truffles. The elevator lurched to a halt, and the doors opened directly into the chaotic, sweltering heat of the venue's industrial kitchen. Chefs were screaming orders over the deafening roar of industrial ventilation fans. Waiters in crisp black vests rushed back and forth, loading crystal champagne flutes onto polished silver trays. I stepped out of the elevator and navigated the maze of stainless steel prep tables with practiced ease. My face remained a mask of absolute, unwavering focus. If I hesitated for even a second, someone would ask what station I belonged to. I moved like I owned the building. I needed to bypass the main kitchen floor and reach the service corridors that ran directly behind the main ballroom walls. These narrow corridors were designed so staff could move invisibly around the perimeter of the event, entering and exiting through hidden swinging doors without disrupting the delicate aesthetic of the wealthy guests. I walked past a massive walk-in freezer and slipped through an unmarked gray door. The deafening noise of the kitchen instantly faded, replaced by the hushed, carpeted silence of the hidden service corridor. I pressed my back against the wall, taking a deep, stabilizing breath. The air in here was cool and smelled of fresh floral arrangements. Just inches away through the thin partition of the wall, I could hear the muffled melodic hum of a live jazz quartet. I heard the light, expensive clinking of crystal glasses and the booming, confident laughter of people who thought they owned the world. Then I heard his voice. I could hear the exact pitch of Trent's voice echoing over a microphone. He was giving a self-congratulatory welcome speech to his investors. He was talking about innovation. He was talking about disrupting the market. He was talking about building a legacy that would change the future of technology. The absolute audacity of the man made my blood burn hot in my veins. He was standing on a stage paid for by my grandmother. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit bought with her stolen money. He was pitching a company funded by draining the lifeblood out of her distribution network and tricking my mother into signing the fraudulent transfers. He thought he had completely outsmarted a family of black women. He thought my mother was a foolish pawn, and that I was a defeated, helpless warehouse worker who would just roll over and accept bankruptcy. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you steal from the wrong bloodline. I walked quietly down the dim corridor until I found a small service alcove located near the main entrance of the ballroom. A tall, polished silver mirror hung on the wall. It was placed there meant for waiters to check their uniforms and fix their posture before stepping out onto the floor to serve the elite. I stood in front of the mirror. I unzipped the baggy white chef's coat and let it slide off my shoulders. It pulled on the floor at my feet like discarded skin. I smoothed the rich fabric of my emerald green gown. I adjusted the delicate diamond brooch pinned securely near my collarbone. I checked my reflection, locking eyes with the fierce, unyielding woman staring back at me. Grandma Josephine had built an empire from a single truck, and she had passed that iron will directly down to me. I was not just a logistics director tonight. I was the executioner. I turned away from the mirror. I placed my hands flat against the padded leather of the swinging service doors. I pushed them open and stepped directly out of the shadows and into the blinding, glittering light of the grand ballroom. The heavy padded leather doors swung shut behind me, completely sealing away the deafening clatter of the industrial catering kitchen. I was instantly bathed in the warm, golden light of the penthouse ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vated ceiling, casting a dazzling, expensive glow over the city's absolute financial elite. Waiters carrying silver trays of imported champagne wove seamlessly through clusters of men in bespoke tuxedos and women draped in couture gowns. The air smelled of expensive designer perfume and stolen wealth. Every single floral arrangement, every crystal flute, and every single appetizer in this massive room was paid for by the sweat of my grandmother's brow and the stolen wages of my warehouse workers. I stood at the edge of the room for a brief moment, letting my eyes adjust to the glaring light. I was not the warehouse manager they were used to dismissing. My emerald green gown swept perfectly against the polished marble floor. I held my head high, my posture forged by years of carrying the weight of my family's legacy on my back. It took less than 30 seconds for someone to notice that I did not belong to their carefully curated guest list. My younger sister, Eliza, was standing near a towering ice sculpture at the center of the room. She was wearing a shimmering silver dress that likely cost more than my lead driver's monthly mortgage payment. She was laughing loudly at a joke made by an older, wealthy man, tossing her hair over her shoulder in a practiced display of high society charm. Then she turned her head, her eyes locked directly onto mine across the crowded floor. Her laughter completely died in her throat. The crystal champagne glass in her hand tilted dangerously, spilling a splash of expensive liquor onto the floor before she barely managed to catch herself. Her jaw literally dropped open. She was so used to seeing me in high-visibility safety vests and denim work jackets. She had no idea how to process the woman standing before her, demanding the attention of the room without saying a single word. Eliza panicked. She frantically tapped the arm of the woman standing next to her. My mother, Vivian. Vivian turned around, a deeply irritated expression on her face that instantly morphed into absolute terror when she saw me. She quickly excused herself from the group of wealthy socialites she had been desperately trying to impress and began power walking toward me. Her heels clicked sharply and rapidly against the marble. She closed the distance between us, her face flushed with the mixture of fear and pure, unadulterated rage. She did not greet me. She did not ask how I managed to get past the private security at the front door. She reached out and dug her manicured fingers aggressively into my bare arm. "What do you think you are doing here, Eliza?" Vivian hissed. She kept her voice extremely low so the nearby guests would not hear the panic vibrating in her throat. Her grip on my arm was tight, attempting to physically turn me back toward the swinging service doors. "You need to leave right now. You are not on the guest list. You are going to ruin this entire night for your sister and Trent. We have highly important people here, investors who are going to secure our family in a brand new tax bracket. Do not embarrass us. Do not make a scene." I looked down at the hand gripping my arm. I stared at her fingers. This was the exact same hand that had forged signatures on transfer slips to drain my grandmother's distribution accounts. This was the same hand that had signed a fake medical injunction, declaring her own mother mentally incompetent just to freeze my payroll and destroy my business. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman standing in front of me. No daughterly affection, no lingering need for her approval or her maternal love. The emotional tether had been completely and permanently severed. She had chosen the proximity to Trent's white privilege and the illusion of his wealth over the loyalty and survival of her own black daughter. "Take your hand off me, Vivian," I said. My voice was eerily calm, entirely lacking any of the explosive anger she expected. I did not call her mom. I stripped her of the title she had so miserably failed to earn. Vivian blinked clearly, caught off guard by the absolute ice in my tone, but her grip only tightened. I said, "Leave, Eliza. You do not belong in this room. You are just trying to destroy everything because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of Aaliyah's lifestyle and Trent's success. I froze your accounts for your own good. You need to learn your place and stop fighting the men who know how to handle real corporate finance. Go home before I call security and have you thrown out like a common trespasser." I pulled my arm away with a sharp, forceful jerk. Vivian stumbled back half a step, completely losing her physical control over me. She looked around nervously, terrified that someone wealthy had noticed her stumble. "I am not here for you," I said, looking right through her as if she were made of glass. "I am here to collect a debt, and you are standing in my way." I stepped past her, completely ignoring the frantic, hushed demands she continued to throw at my back. My eyes scanned the crowded ballroom, cutting through the sea of expensive suits and sparkling dresses. My logistics training automatically mapped the room, identifying the obstacles and charting the most direct path to my objective. I found my target almost immediately. Trent was standing near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. He looked exactly like the king of the world. He was holding court with 3 older men who I recognized instantly from the financial news circuits. They were some of the most powerful and ruthless venture capitalists in the state. Trent was holding a glass of amber bourbon, gesturing expansively with his free hand. He was pitching his vision, selling them a fabricated story of innovation and market disruption. He was completely in his element, feeding off their validation, entirely unaware that the foundation of his entire empire had just walked into the room. I glided across the ballroom floor. I did not rush. I moved with the deliberate predatory grace of a woman who held every single winning card in the deck. A few guests turned to look at me, captivated by the emerald gown and the absolute purpose radiating from my stride. They parted slightly, opening a clear path for me to walk through. As I got closer, I could hear the sickening arrogance in Trent's voice. "We built this infrastructure from the ground up," Trent was telling the investors, flashing his most charming smile. "It takes a certain kind of relentless dedication to optimize a network like ours. We are ready to scale globally." He was claiming my grandmother's relentless dedication as his own. He was wearing her legacy like a costume to impress men with deep pockets. Trent was mid-sentence when he finally noticed the subtle shift in the crowd around him. He glanced over the shoulder of the venture capitalist he was speaking to. Our eyes met. I saw the exact second his brain registered my presence. The arrogant, charming smile completely froze on his face. His posture stiffened so rigidly he looked like a statue. The hand holding his expensive bourbon stopped midair. He knew I had bypassed his security. He knew I was the last person on Earth who was supposed to be inside this room. But he was trapped. He could not cause a scene. He could not yell or call for his guards without looking like an erratic coward in front of the powerful men who held the keys to his future funding. He was forced to play along with whatever I was about to do. I stepped right up to the small circle of men. I did not scowl. I did not look angry or unhinged. I plastered a brilliant, warm, and entirely fake smile across my face. "Trent, darling," I said smoothly. My voice projected just enough for the surrounding investors to hear my cheerful greeting. "I am so sorry I am late. The traffic coming from the warehouse was simply terrible tonight." The investors looked at me with polite curiosity, clearly impressed by my presence and the ease with which I interrupted their conversation. Trent swallowed hard. I watched a single bead of sweat suddenly form at his temple and trace its way down his jawline. Eliza, Trent managed to choke out. He forced his lips into a strained, trembling smile. "I did not think you would make it tonight. I know how busy you are with your little projects." "I would not miss the launch of your new venture for the world," I replied. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was standing so close to him that our shoulders nearly brushed. I turned my warm smile toward the investors, giving them a polite and deferential nod before leaning in close to Trent's ear. I kept my face angled toward the crowd, looking for all the world like a proud, supportive sister-in-law sharing a private word of encouragement. I lowered my voice to a razor-sharp whisper that only he could possibly hear. "I know about the dummy vendor accounts, Trent," I whispered into his ear. "I know about the fraudulent invoices." I leaned in a fraction of an inch closer and spoke a single 9-digit routing number directly into his ear. It was the exact routing number of the primary phantom shell company he had used to embezzle my grandmother's money. I whispered the routing number into his ear. 9 simple digits. But in the world of corporate finance, 9 digits are the exact coordinates of a buried body. It was the routing number for the Phantom Limited Liability Company registered to an empty dirt lot in Delaware. The exact account he had used to siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars away from my grandmother's distribution network to fund this pathetic party. I pulled back slowly, maintaining my bright, supportive sister-in-law's smile. I watched the blood completely drain from Trent's face, leaving him looking like a pale, hollow ghost. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The confident, visionary tech founder vanished entirely. He was replaced by a cornered thief, realizing the spotlight had just illuminated his crimes in front of the very people he was trying to impress. His pale eyes darted frantically around the small circle of venture capitalists. He was calculating the blast radius of my whisper. He knew I had the shadow ledgers. He knew I had the irrefutable proof of his embezzlement. Trent let out a sudden, high-pitched chuckle that sounded completely unnatural and frantic. He slammed his expensive glass of amber bourbon down onto a passing waiter's silver tray. He slammed it so hard the crystal nearly shattered against the metal. "Please excuse us, gentlemen," Trent said to the investors. His voice was tight and trembling slightly, lacking all the smooth charisma he possessed just 30 seconds ago. "A minor family matter requires my immediate attention. You know how these family things go. I will be right back to discuss that expansion strategy." The investors offered polite, confused nods. They were sharks themselves, and they could smell blood in the water. They knew a panicked man when they saw one. Before anyone could say another word, Trent's hand shot out. His fingers clamped down around my upper arm like an industrial steel vise. His grip was bruising and punishing a sudden escalation of physical force meant to intimidate and control me right there on the ballroom floor. He did not politely guide me away. He dragged me. He pulled me forcefully through the crowded ballroom. His polished leather shoes cut a harsh, erratic path through the sea of couture gowns and tailored tuxedos. I did not fight his grip. I did not scream or pull away. In the logistics industry, when a hostile force tries to redirect your cargo, you do not panic. You assess their destination, and if it aligns with your strategic objective, you let them provide the transportation. Trent was leading me exactly where I needed him to go. We passed the towering ice sculpture. I saw Aaliyah clutching her champagne glass, her eyes wide with mounting panic as she watched her husband unraveling in real time. We passed my mother, Vivian, who took one eager step toward us before freezing in place, completely terrified of causing a public scene that might damage her precious social standing. I kept my posture perfect, my back straight, letting the emerald silk of my gown sweep elegantly across the marble. As the man who stole my family legacy dragged me away from the light, Trent shoved me through a set of heavy frosted glass doors located at the far end of the grand ballroom. We stumbled into a dimly lit, thickly carpeted hallway reserved strictly for VIP guests and venue management. The deafening noise of the jazz quartet and the lively clinking of crystal glasses vanished the very instant the heavy doors swung shut behind us. We were completely isolated from the glittering party. The sudden silence was suffocating. Trent did not stop walking. He hauled me down the plush corridor toward a private executive lounge located at the very end of the hall. He threw open the heavy, solid oak door, shoved me roughly inside the dark room, and stepped in right behind me. He slammed the door shut with a violent crack that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. The sharp, heavy click of the brass deadbolts sliding into place signaled his intent. He locked us inside. Trent turned around to face me. The charming, sophisticated tech brother facade melted away entirely, leaving nothing but ugly, desperate reality. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. The veins in his neck were bulging prominently against the crisp white collar of his expensive dress shirt. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he glared at me across the expensive leather furniture. The room smelled of stale, cigar smoke, and old money. It was the kind of room designed for men like Trent to make backroom deals without consequence. He thought the soundproof walls gave him total immunity. "How did you get that number?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stepped toward me, closing the distance, trying to use his height and his physical presence to overwhelm me. He wanted to make me feel small. He wanted to make me feel like the helpless black woman he assumed I was. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room. I smoothed the rich fabric of my emerald green gown where his fingers had wrinkled the silk. I reached up and calmly adjusted the diamond brooch pinned securely near my collarbone. "You really want to talk about banking details right now, Trent?" I asked calmly. My voice did not shake. "You want to talk about how a man who claims to be a visionary founder had to steal from a dead woman to pay for the champagne his guests are drinking out there?" Trent paced the floor like a caged animal. He ran his trembling hands through his perfectly styled hair, completely ruining the aesthetic he had spent hours curating for the cameras. He kicked a heavy leather ottoman out of his path, sending it skidding aggressively across the thick carpet until it slammed into a mahogany bookcase. "You broke into the safe," Trent accused, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You broke into your own grandmother's safe and stole my corporate property. You are a thief, Eliza." I stared at him, my expression completely flat and unimpressed. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. "You are projecting, Trent. You want to talk about thermal drills and biometric master codes that mysteriously bypass glass relockers. You want to talk about how you manipulated a status-obsessed woman into handing over the keys to her own family's generational wealth just so you could look like a successful man." Trent stopped pacing. The accusation hit its mark perfectly. He lunged forward, closing the remaining distance between us in 2 massive strides until he had me backed up against a heavy mahogany credenza. He planted a hand on the wood on either side of my hips, effectively trapping me against the furniture. His breath smelled of stale bourbon in sheer desperation. He leaned down, his face mere inches from mine, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. "You listened to me very carefully, Eliza." Trent spat a drop of saliva flying from his lips. "You are going to tell me exactly who you gave those files to. You are going to hand over every single physical copy of that ledger tonight. And then you are going to walk out of this building, drive back to your pathetic warehouse, and sign your logistics company over to me just like we agreed." I did not blink. I looked right through him. He leaned in even closer, his eyes burning with a toxic, deeply entitled rage. He truly believed his own delusions. He believed the world would always protect him because of what he looked like, the suit he wore, and the systemic privilege he had weaponized his entire life. He believed he could walk into my family, strip us of everything we had built, and walk away clean. "You think you're so smart?" Trent hissed, his voice trembling with absolute venom. "You think because you wear a nice dress and memorize a few bank routing numbers that you can actually play in my league? You are nothing, Eliza. You are just a warehouse manager playing dress-up, and nobody is ever going to believe a single word you say." He smiled, a cold, vicious expression of absolute certainty. He thought he had me completely cornered. He thought he had stripped me of all my leverage. He thought we were entirely alone. I did not break eye contact. I did not shrink back against the heavy mahogany credenza. I let his threats hang in the stale, cigar-scented air of the executive lounge. My silence was a tactical decision. In the logistics industry, when you are negotiating with a hostile vendor, the person who speaks first to fill the quiet is usually the one who loses control. I needed him to keep talking. I needed his monumental ego to take the wheel. Trent let out a sharp, breathless laugh. He took a step back, running his hands over his face, shaking his head as if he found my composure genuinely hilarious. "You really do not get it, do you?" Trent said. He began to pace the length of the room, his expensive leather shoes sinking deep into the plush carpet. "You think you can just march in here with a routing number and scare me? You think you can play hardball with the big boys? But you have absolutely nothing. You do not have the original contracts. You do not have the master ledgers. Do you want to know why you do not have them, Eliza?" He stopped pacing and pointed a finger aggressively at his own chest. "Because I took them," he bragged his chest, puffing out with an unearned, sickening pride. "I walked right into that dusty old brownstone, and I took every single piece of paper your grandmother spent 50 years hoarding. And the best part is, I did not even have to break a sweat to do it. I kept my expression entirely neutral, acting as the perfect silent sounding board for his narcissism. Your mother handed me the master code to that floor safe on a silver platter," Trent sneered. He shook his head with profound amusement. "Vivian was so desperate, Eliza. It was actually pathetic to watch. She wanted an invitation to this gala tonight so badly. She wanted to stand next to my venture capital investors and pretend she was part of the elite. She wants so desperately to wash off the smell of the working class. All I had to do was tell her that Aaliyah needed a little financial security for our future, and Vivian practically tripped over herself to give me the combination. She sold out her own mother's life work for a chance to drink free champagne and take pictures in a couture dress. He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with a predatory joy, and breaking the lock afterward. Trent chuckled, shrugging his shoulders. That was child's play. I hired a guy for $500 to take a thermal drill to the door just to make it look like a forced break-in for the police and the insurance company. It was so incredibly easy to take everything from your family. Josephine was just an old, stubborn woman who did not know her place in the modern world. She built a decent little delivery route, sure, but she had no idea how real corporate finance works. She thought she could hold on to that business forever and keep it away from me. I simply corrected her mistake. You forged the corporate transfer document, I stated calmly. It was not a question, but a deliberate prompt to keep him talking. Of course I did, Trent shot back, absolutely beaming with pride. I typed it up myself on my laptop. I paid off a shady notary who owed me a favor to stamp it and backdate it, and I paid that private doctor $10,000 to write up a fake severe dementia diagnosis for your mother to sign. Vivian did not even read the medical affidavit before she put her pen on the paper. She just signed exactly where I told her to sign, just like she signed all those transfer slips for the last 3 years without asking a single question. Trent leaned against the back of a tufted leather armchair, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He thought he was giving a masterclass in corporate espionage. He had no idea he was reading his own criminal indictment out loud in a soundproof room. You mean the dummy vendor accounts? I said, keeping my voice low and steady. The refrigerated freight trucks that do not exist. The supply line consulting fees paid to empty dirt lots. Trent waved his hand dismissively in the air. It was brilliant financial logistics, Eliza. You should really appreciate the mechanics of it. Your grandmother's distribution network was bleeding cash and nobody even noticed because I was managing the books. I set up 3 phantom shell companies in Delaware. I created fake invoices for operational consulting and routed them directly to Vivian's desk for final approval. Your mother authorized hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments to my personal accounts, thinking she was paying legitimate vetted vendors. I bled that old woman's empire completely dry, and I used every single cent to fund my tech startup. He gestured expansively around the room, pointing toward the heavy frosted glass doors that led back out to the glittering ballroom. Everything out there tonight, Trent boasted, his voice rising with manic, unhinged excitement. The penthouse venue, the gourmet catering, the marketing campaign, the investors drinking at the open bar, it was all paid for by Josephine. I took that old woman for everything she had, and I used your own mother to do it. You made Vivian an accomplice to felony embezzlement, I said. Trent laughed out loud, a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the dark wood-paneled walls. I made Vivian my perfect little insurance policy. If you take those routing numbers to the police, Eliza, who do you think they are going to arrest? My name is not on a single authorized transfer slip. Vivian's signature is on every single one of them. You blow the whistle on me, your mother goes straight to a federal penitentiary for corporate fraud. You are completely trapped. You cannot save your grandmother's legacy without sending your mother to prison. Trent pushed off the armchair and walked slowly toward me again. The manic excitement faded into a cold, heavy menace. He stopped just inches away from my face, breathing heavily. He wanted to ensure I felt the absolute hopelessness of my situation. You have no money, Trent whispered, his voice dripping with malice. Your business accounts are frozen tight. Your payroll is going to bounce in less than 48 hours. Your independent logistics firm is going to collapse. You have no power here. You are locked out of the estate, and your own mother hates you enough to help me destroy you. He reached out and grabbed the rich fabric of my emerald green gown near my shoulder, giving it a sharp, demeaning tug. So, you are going to walk out of this room? Trent commanded, his eyes burning into mine with an arrogant fury. You are going to go back to your dirty warehouse, and you are going to sign that buyout contract before 5 tomorrow afternoon. You are going to give me your logistics company for exactly $1, because if you do not, I will let your business drown, and I will let the police haul your mother away in handcuffs. Who is going to believe you, Eliza? You are nothing but an angry, bitter black woman making up lies to steal from her successful brother-in-law. The system will never ever take your side against mine. I looked at the hand gripping the fabric of my dress. I looked at his pale, entitled face, flushed with the absolute certainty of his own supremacy. He had laid out every single detail of his crimes. He had confessed to the forgery, the medical fraud, the embezzlement, and the manipulation of my mother. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed, wrapped neatly in a bow of his own unmatched arrogance. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg for my business. I simply smiled. It was a slow, genuinely terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the smile of a woman who had just watched her enemy step directly onto a live landmine. Trent saw the smile and his grip on my dress faltered. Confusion flickered across his face. He expected tears. He expected me to break under the immense weight of his threats. My absolute calm completely shattered his carefully rehearsed script. I raised my right hand and smoothly brushed his fingers away from my shoulder. I casually adjusted the diamond brooch pinned securely near my collarbone. "You are right, Trent," I said quietly. My voice was smooth and perfectly measured. "I am just a logistics manager, but the entire foundation of logistics." I continued, my voice ringing with absolute clarity against the dark wood-paneled walls of the private lounge, is making sure the right package gets to the right destination at exactly the right time. I tapped the face of the diamond brooch again. It was a firm, deliberate double tap. A microscopic green light, virtually invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look for it, blinked twice in the center of the largest stone. Trent stared at the piece of jewelry, his pale eyes dilated, the rapid, arrogant rising and falling of his chest suddenly hitched. I watched his brain frantically attempt to process the information I had just handed him. He looked at the brooch, then up to my eyes, and then back down to the brooch. The absolute certainty of his own supremacy was actively short-circuiting. "This is not a piece of vintage jewelry I borrowed from my grandmother's vanity," I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my hands relaxed at my sides. "It is a live, high-grade transmission microphone. It operates on a secured, encrypted frequency, and it has been broadcasting every single word of this conversation since the moment you dragged me through those frosted glass doors." Trent stumbled backward. His expensive leather shoes snagged on the thick plush carpet, and he awkwardly caught his balance against the heavy mahogany credenza he had just used to trap me. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The confident, untouchable tech founder vanished, leaving behind a terrified, cornered thief who realized he had just walked willingly into a slaughterhouse. "You are bluffing," Trent stammered. His voice was a thin, wray whisper, completely stripped of its former booming authority. He shook his head violently, holding up his hands as if he could physically push my words away from him. "You are lying. You bought a fake wire online to try and scare me. That audio is inadmissible in court anyway. You do not have a warrant." I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. It was a cold sound that made Trent flinch. "You watch too many television shows, Trent," I replied, taking a slow, measured step toward the center of the room. "I am not a police officer. I do not need a warrant to record a conversation regarding the theft of my own business assets. But more importantly, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of a supply chain. You assume my goal was simply to record you and take a digital file to a police precinct tomorrow morning. You think I am playing a slow game?" I took another step, reclaiming the physical space in the room. Trent pressed his back flat against the wall, putting as much distance between us as possible. He was trembling. I could actually see the fine fabric of his tailored shirt shaking over his chest. "I do not play slow games," I said smoothly. "I optimize routes. I eliminate bottlenecks. When you rely on other people to build your empire for you, you never bothered to learn the blueprints of the buildings you occupy. You booked this penthouse venue because it looked expensive and you wanted to impress men with deep pockets. You just threw down a credit card and assumed the space belonged to you. But I supply the catering company that services this entire building. I know the floor plans. I know the structural logistics of this exact floor." I turned away from him and began walking slowly toward the back of the VIP lounge. "Wait!" Trent gasped, his voice cracking with pure panic. He pushed off the wall, taking a desperate stumbling step toward me. "Eliza!" "Wait. What are you doing?" I did not stop walking. "I know that VIP Lounge B. The room we are currently standing in was designed specifically for private executive meetings," I explained over my shoulder. "I know that the walls are completely soundproof to the outside hallway, but I also know that this room shares a primary adjoining wall with Executive Boardroom A. I stopped in front of the massive, heavy double doors that separated the two spaces. The doors were crafted from solid oak featuring thick brass handles and a commercial-grade locking mechanism. Trent had completely ignored them when he dragged me in here, assuming they were just decorative panels or a locked storage closet. "Eliza, stop," Trent pleaded. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, begging whine. He held his hands out his palms, sweating. "We can make a deal. I can give you the logistics company back. I can tear up the buyout contract right now. I will transfer the distribution business back to the estate tomorrow morning. Just turn that microphone off, please." I rested my hands on the cold brass handles of the double doors. "I already own the logistics company," I said, looking over my shoulder to meet his terrified gaze one last time. "And I already own the distribution empire. You never actually took anything from me, Trent. You just temporarily relocated it, and now I am finalizing the delivery of your consequences. You stole from my grandmother. You manipulated my mother into committing federal fraud. You tried to bankrupt my employees, risking their homes and their families just to fund your pathetic vanity project. You looked at a family of black women and saw nothing but a resource for you to exploit. You thought your suit, your smile, and your systemic privilege would make you completely invisible to the consequences of your own actions." Trent opened his mouth to beg again, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer, undeniable weight of his own destruction. I pushed down hard on the heavy brass levers. The internal mechanisms clicked loudly in the quiet room. I leaned my weight forward and threw the double doors wide open. The contrast between the two rooms was stark and immediate. The VIP lounge behind me was dim-smelling of stale cigars and shadows. The executive boardroom I just revealed was bathed in bright, unforgiving fluorescent light. I stepped to the side, completely clearing the visual path so Trent could see exactly what was waiting for him. Sitting in the exact center of a long, polished oak conference table was a black wireless speaker. It was plugged directly into a high-grade audio receiver. A solid, glowing green light on the front of the speaker indicated that it was actively transmitting. It had broadcasted every single boast, every single threat, and every single confession Trent had made over the last 15 minutes in crystal-clearer, high-define audio. But the speaker was not the most important thing in the room. It was the audience sitting around the table. Sitting directly across from the open doors were the three major venture capitalists Trent had been pitching his startup to just moments ago in the ballroom. The wealthy, powerful men he had dragged me away from. I had leveraged my catering contacts to quietly escort them into this boardroom 5 minutes before I ever stepped foot onto the gala floor. The investors were sitting perfectly still. Their faces were carved from solid stone. They radiated absolute, uncompromising disgust. They had just listened to the man they were about to give millions of dollars to explicitly detail how he forged legal documents, drilled open a dead woman's floor safe, and embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars through phantom shell companies. Trent's entire professional reputation, his funding, and his future in the tech industry were instantly pulverized before his very eyes. Sitting at the far end of the long oak table was Mr. Sterling. My grandmother's estate attorney had his hands folded neatly over his leather briefcase. He did not look frail or exhausted anymore. He looked right past me and locked his eyes directly onto Trent. Mr. Sterling wore an expression of cold, vindicated satisfaction. He had the sworn duty to protect my grandmother's assets, and he had just been handed the exact verbal confession required to void the fraudulent corporate transfer document Trent had smugly tossed onto his desk earlier that afternoon. But the final element of my logistics delivery was standing against the back wall of the boardroom. Two men stood shoulder to shoulder, their arms crossed over their chests. They were not wearing expensive tuxedos or couture evening wear. They were wearing dark, unassuming, highly practical government-issued suits. Clipped prominently to their leather belts were heavy gold badges that caught the bright fluorescent light of the room. They were special agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I had not called the local police precinct. I had called the federal government. Embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars through dummy corporations and moving it across state lines into a tech startup was not a simple family dispute. It was a massive, highly documented federal tax crime. And federal agents do not care about a white man's country club aesthetic when they have a live, uncoerced audio confession of corporate fraud and wire tampering. Trent stared into the bright boardroom, his knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany credenza to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. He could not breathe. He was suffocating on the absolute certainty of his own ruin. He looked at the venture capitalists who were already standing up to leave. He looked at the federal agents who were stepping forward, their hands moving methodically toward the handcuffs resting on their belts. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed him entirely. The silence inside the executive boardroom was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Trent's chest. He stared at the glowing green light on the wireless speaker, then slowly raised his terrified eyes to the three venture capitalists sitting around the long oak table. These were men who controlled billions of dollars in tech funding. They had just heard him detail a massive federal fraud scheme in his own arrogant voice. The lead investor, an older man with silver hair and a sharp-tailored suit, stood up from his leather chair. He did not yell. He did not ask for an explanation. He simply buttoned his jacket and looked at Trent with an expression of absolute freezing disgust. He told Trent that their investment firm had a strict zero-tolerance policy for corporate espionage and embezzlement, especially when it involved defrauding family members to fake a startup valuation. The other two investors immediately followed his lead, gathering their expensive briefcases in complete silence. "Wait, please," Trent begged, his voice cracking as he stumbled forward into the bright boardroom. He reached out with trembling hands. "Let me explain everything. That audio is completely taken out of context. It is a family misunderstanding. We can still scale the application. The user acquisition numbers are real." The lead investor did not even pause his stride. He walked right past Trent, his face an unreadable mask of elite indifference. He told Trent that the only thing scaling tonight was his prison sentence. The three men exited through the heavy double doors and disappeared down the corridor, taking Trent's entire future in the tech industry with them. Trent stood frozen in the center of the room, watching his funding walk away forever. But he did not have time to mourn his ruined startup. The two federal agents standing against the back wall moved forward in perfect, terrifying synchronization. They did not look like the private security guards out in the ballroom. They moved with the unmistakable heavy authority of the federal government. One agent pulled a thick stack of folded papers from his jacket, while the other unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his leather belt. Trent stepped backward, his hands shaking wildly. He looked around the room as if searching for a hidden exit, but there was nowhere left to run. The lead agent identified himself as Special Agent Reynolds with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He informed Trent that they had secured federal warrants for his immediate arrest, the total seizure of his limited liability company assets, and a complete freeze on his personal bank accounts. The charges included multiple counts of felony wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, tax evasion, and interstate financial manipulation. Trent shook his head frantically, his breathing turning into shallow, panicked gasps. "You cannot do this," he stammered, his chest heaving under his custom shirt. "I am a tech founder. You do not understand the complex logistics of the transfers. I am well connected in this city. I know the mayor. You are making a massive mistake." The agent remained completely unmoved by the desperate display of entitlement. He told Trent to turn around and place his hands behind his back. When Trent hesitated, paralyzed by pure, unadulterated panic, the second agent stepped forward and forcefully turned him around. He snapped the cold steel cuffs securely around Trent's wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly across the quiet boardroom, finalizing the destruction of Trent's untouchable facade. Suddenly, the frosted glass doors leading from the ballroom burst open. Eliza rushed into the VIP lounge and froze when she saw the scene unfolding in the adjoining boardroom. Vivian hurried in right behind her, completely out of breath. They had noticed Trent's sudden disappearance from the gala floor and came looking for him, terrified that the wealthy investors had been somehow offended by his absence. Instead of a successful business meeting, they found Trent facing the wall in federal handcuffs. Trent saw Eliza standing in the doorway, and his deeply ingrained survival instincts kicked into overdrive. "The man who had spent 3 years demanding absolute loyalty and financial support from my family instantly decided to sacrifice his own wife to save his own skin. It was her," Trent shouted, twisting his body to point a cuffed hand frantically at Eliza. "I did not mastermind this scheme. She knew everything. She spent all the stolen money. She was the one who demanded $30,000 shopping sprees in Paris. She wanted the country club lifestyle and pressured me into securing the funds. She is a co-conspirator. Arrest her, too." Eliza's face contorted in absolute horror. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, and the crystal champagne flute she was still holding slipped from her trembling fingers. It shattered into tiny pieces on the plush carpet, spilling expensive wine everywhere. The golden child who had spent her entire life being protected, pampered and placed on a pedestal, suddenly realized her perfect white husband was throwing her directly to the federal wolves to lighten his own sentence. Aaliyah let out a blood-curdling scream. The pristine, elegant, high society aesthetic she valued above all else completely evaporated in an instant. She lunged forward, her expensive silver couture gown sweeping violently across the floor. She threw herself at Trent, her manicured hands turning into frantic claws. She slapped his chest and shoulders, screaming that he was a liar and a monster. She yelled that he had promised her wealth and status, but instead, he was turning her into a criminal suspect. Trent tried to shield his face, ducking his head, but with his hands cuffed behind his back, he was completely defenseless against her rage. Aaliyah struck him across the jaw, her heavy diamond rings leaving a bright red jagged scratch down his cheek. The federal agents immediately stepped in to establish order. One agent grabbed Aaliyah firmly by the waist, physically pulling her away from Trent. He warned her sternly that assaulting a suspect in federal custody would result in her own immediate arrest and detention. Aaliyah collapsed onto the floor, sobbing hysterically into her hands. The shimmering silver fabric of her designer dress pulled around her on the carpet like a broken, discarded mirror. Vivian stood near the doorway, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. She looked at Trent, shivering in handcuffs. She looked at her favorite daughter, sobbing uncontrollably on the floor. Then she slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. I was standing calmly beside the long oak conference table, my posture perfectly straight, my emerald green gown completely unruffled. I had orchestrated the entire destruction of her false reality, without breaking a single sweat or raising my voice. I was the master of supply chains, and I had successfully delivered ruin to her doorstep. Vivian's shock morphed instantly into a desperate, clinging manipulation. She rushed toward me, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. She reached out with both hands, trying to grab my arms, but I took a smooth, calculated step back. I denied her the physical connection she suddenly craved now that her wealthy savior had fallen. "Eliza, please," Vivian cried, her voice cracking with manufactured grief and panic. "You have to fix this. You have to stop these agents. We are family. You know Aaliyah is fragile and cannot handle a scandal like this. You know Trent just got in over his head with his business. You have the money now. You have the business back. Please just tell the agents it was a misunderstanding. We have to stick together. You cannot let your own family be destroyed in public." I looked at the woman who had birthed me. I looked at the woman who had gleefully signed fraudulent medical papers declaring her own mother mentally incompetent just to freeze my payroll and destroy my life. She did not care about justice. She did not care about my survival or the livelihoods of the black workers at my logistics firm. She only cared about preserving the fractured illusion of her high society life. She wanted me to clean up her mess and protect her image, just like I had always done. I raised my right hand, holding it up firmly between us. The gesture was a solid, impenetrable wall. It stopped her dead in her tracks. I reached into my small evening clutch and pulled out a sleek, encrypted flash drive. It contained the complete digital copy of my grandmother's shadow ledger, the dummy vendor routing numbers, and the isolated audio file of Trent explicitly confessing to forging the documents and tricking Vivian into signing them. I did not hand the drive to my mother. I walked past her, ignoring her desperate pleas, and handed it directly to Mr. Sterling. I looked Vivian dead in the eye, stripping away decades of forced obedience and toxic one-sided loyalty. I did not wait for my mother to formulate another pathetic excuse. I did not wait for her to conjure up another reason why I should sacrifice my own survival to protect her fragile social standing. I handed the encrypted flash drive directly to Mr. Sterling and took a deliberate step backward, removing myself completely from her physical orbit. Vivian stood frozen in the center of the executive boardroom, her hands suspended in the empty air between us. She looked down at the shattered remains of Aaliyah's crystal champagne flute glistening on the carpet, then looked at Trent, who was being aggressively hauled to his feet by the federal agents. Trent did not look like a visionary tech founder anymore. He looked like a cornered, terrified rat. The federal agents marched him toward the heavy double doors, his hands secured tightly behind his back in cold steel cuffs. He kept his head down completely, refusing to make eye contact with me or the venture capitalists who had just witnessed his spectacular professional execution. As the agents escorted him out into the private corridor, Aaliyah remained crumpled on the floor, weeping hysterically over her ruined silver couture gown. She was mourning the sudden, violent death of her country club aesthetic. I stepped smoothly over the trailing fabric of my sister's expensive dress. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. She had actively cheered while her husband tried to steal my grandmother's entire legacy and bankrupt my employees. She was experiencing the absolute, unfiltered consequences of her own boundless greed. I walked out of the executive boardroom, leaving my mother and my sister to sit in the ashes of the empire they had tried to burn down. I navigated the hidden service corridors of the skyscraper, my emerald green gown swishing softly against the carpeted floors. I bypassed the chaotic, sweltering heat of the industrial catering kitchen and stepped into the descending freight elevator. When I finally walked out of the loading dock and into the freezing night air of the financial district, I took a deep, cleansing breath. The cold wind bit at my bare shoulders, but it felt like absolute, undeniable freedom. I had walked into a fortress of systemic privilege, and I had burned the enemy to the ground, using nothing but my own logistical brilliance. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in swift, brutal efficiency. With Trent sitting in a federal holding cell, and the high-defin audio confession securely in Mr. Sterling's possession. The aggressively expensive corporate lawyers Trent had hired dropped him immediately. Lawyers who deal in venture capital do not risk their own licenses to defend a client caught on tape, admitting to federal tax evasion and the forgery of medical documents, the fraudulent corporate transfer document that Trent had so smugly tossed onto Mr. Sterling's desk was legally voided before the ink could even fully cure. Mr. Sterling did not waste a single minute. He took the audio evidence straight to the courthouse the very next morning. He filed an emergency motion to vacate the medical injunction. The judge who had originally signed the order was absolutely furious to discover he had been manipulated by a falsified medical affidavit and a bribed physician. He struck the injunction from the record, immediately signing the reversal with a heavy, angry stroke of his pen. I was sitting at the large mahogany desk in my logistics office when my private banker called me. He did not sound terrified anymore. He sounded profoundly relieved. He told me to refresh my banking application. I hit the refresh key on my computer keyboard. The glaring red banner that had been blocking my screen completely vanished. The balances on my operating accounts, my payroll accounts, and my corporate credit lines instantly repopulated, displaying millions of dollars in available, unencumbered liquid capital. The accounts had unfrozen with exactly 12 hours to spare before the state banking deadline. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. I opened the payroll portal, verified the routing numbers, and hit the final approval button. I watched the digital confirmations roll across my screen as the funds successfully dispersed through the supply chain. Jamal was going to be able to pay his new mortgage. Sarah was going to be able to make her student loan payment. The 75 hardworking Black men and women who relied on my logistics firm were going to feed their families on Friday. I had protected my people. With my independent business fully secured, I turned my attention to the complete and total takeover of my grandmother's empire. I took full, undisputed legal control of the $4.5 million estate. Every single delivery truck, every warehouse lease, every vendor contract, and every liquid asset belonging to the Southern Food Distribution Network was officially transferred into my name. I merged my grandmother's historic routes with my own modern logistics firm, creating a massive, unstoppable supply chain powerhouse that dominated the regional market. But I was not finished cleaning house. Grandma Josephine owned a portfolio of residential properties across the city. One of those properties was a luxurious high-rise condominium located in a highly gentrified neighborhood. Aaliyah and Vivian had been living in that condo rent-free for the past 3 years, treating my grandmother's real estate like their own personal kingdom, while sneering at the working-class people who funded it. I did not call them. I did not send them a polite text message. I hired a specialized process server to handle 2 certified 30-day eviction notices directly to their front door. Vivian tried to call my cell phone 50 times in a single afternoon. When I blocked her number, she sent a barrage of frantic emails. She begged for mercy, playing the role of the devoted mother. She claimed that I owed her a roof over her head because she had given me life. She swore she was a victim of trans manipulation and that she never meant to hurt me. I replied with a single devastating sentence. I reminded her of the $10,000 she stole from Grandma Josephine's purse, and I told her she had exactly 30 days to vacate my property before I sent the sheriff to physically remove her belongings. The reality of the bed they had made finally crashed down on them. Without Trent's fabricated tech funding, and without my grandmother's estate to bleed dry, Vivian and Aaliyah were entirely cut off from the wealth they felt so deeply entitled to. They were forced to pack their designer clothes into cheap cardboard boxes and move into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of the city. Aaliyah's entire life imploded. The federal government seized every single asset connected to Trent's limited liability company, including her expensive cars and her frozen joint bank accounts. Trent was denied bail, facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for massive corporate fraud and wire tampering. Aaliyah was forced to trade her shimmering couture gowns for a polyester uniform. She had to get a minimum wage job working the cash register at a retail store just to afford her own groceries. The golden child finally had to learn the value of a hard day's work. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled. I stood on the wide wraparound porch of Grandma Josephine's historic brownstone. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set over the city, casting a warm golden glow across the quiet tree-lined street. I looked down at the front lawn. The heavy commercial moving truck Trent had parked on the grass was a distant memory. I had hired a team of local landscapers to repair the damage. The prize-winning rose bushes my grandmother had loved so dearly were fully restored, blooming with vibrant, resilient crimson flowers. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, enjoying the profound, uninterrupted silence of my own property. The distribution company was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I had officially promoted Maxine to Director of Warehouse Operations, giving her the salary, the benefits, and the absolute respect she had earned over 2 decades of flawless loyalty. We had just signed contracts to purchase 10 brand new delivery trucks, and I had hired 20 new drivers directly from our own community, providing them with solid wages and full healthcare coverage. I leaned against the wooden railing of the porch, reflecting on the true meaning of generational wealth. Vivian and Aaliyah thought generational wealth was about country club memberships, designer handbags, and proximity to whiteness. They thought it was an aesthetic you wore to impress people who fundamentally despised you. But Grandma Josephine knew the truth, and she had passed that truth directly down to me. Generational wealth is not an aesthetic. It is a fortress. It is the ability to build a secure, impenetrable wall around your community and protect the people who actually put in the labor. It is the power to stand your ground when predators try to consume you. It is the absolute resilience to survive the storm and emerge even stronger on the other side. Toxic family loyalty is a dangerous, suffocating trap. It is a system designed to make you set yourself on fire just to keep your abusers warm. My mother had expected me to burn myself to ashes so she could maintain her illusion of high society status. She expected me to quietly surrender my grandmother's legacy to a thief simply because he was a man in a tailored suit. I stopped setting myself on fire. I stood on the porch of the house I legally owned, looking out over the empire I had successfully protected and expanded. I felt a deep anchoring warmth in my chest. I knew Grandma Josephine would be incredibly proud of the fortress I had built. I had protected the supply chain. I had protected our people. I had honored her blood, her sweat, and her unbreakable spirit. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling the cool evening breeze sweep across my face. I was entirely at peace. I was completely beautifully unbothered, knowing with absolute certainty that I had finally permanently taken out the trash. The most powerful takeaway from Alyssa's journey is that your true value is never determined by the flawed assessments of others. Sometimes, the very family that should protect you will completely underestimate your brilliance and betray your trust for a quick, selfish payout. But real power comes from having the vision to see massive potential where everyone else only sees a worthless mess. It requires the unwavering courage to legally and unapologetically defend what is rightfully yours, alongside the wisdom to cut ties with toxic family dynamics. You have to define your own worth, build your own empire, and never apologize for surviving the storm. Have you ever had to fiercely protect your worth and your legacy from relatives who constantly underestimated you? Drop your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more triumphant stories of women reclaiming their absolute power.